In a lot of franchises, specifically in superhero franchises, villains are extremely popular. Despite their awful actions, they're often venerated by the fandom and feature heavily on merch, with their storylines and backstory often receiving the most attention and acclaim. But if there's one thing I've noticed in Miraculous, it's that a lot of the fanbase hates the villains with an undying passion. Lila, Chloe, Hawkmoth, the three big bad guys as of the end of Season 3, are usually the target of most of this rage, although Chloe's a little bit of a different case, with large elements of the fanbase also viewing her in a much more positive light. So that being said, sometimes I think the hate these characters have is a little bit disproportionate to the actions or behaviour they undertake in the show. So today I want to talk about which of these villains are actually horrible monsters, and which ones are actually misunderstood. Before I start, I'll say I know a lot of the fandom considers Felix a villain, but I'm not including him in this list simply because we've only seen him in one episode, so we don't really have quite enough info on him. He hasn't really made an impact or been too heavily involved in my opinion to rank properly on the list as of yet. We'll start with one of the most controversial characters in the show, Chloe. I would have to say, of the main villains, she's probably the least villainous of the bunch. All her actions are quite easily explainable. For starters, just look at her parents. One is a raging narcissist, and the other one a raging enabler. Is it any wonder she turned out like she has? They are the real reason that she has such antisocial tendencies and runs rampant bullying and demeaning other people. And on top of that, she really did try to be a hero at one point. She tried to make it work as Queen Bee. But Ladybug took that away from her. Now, I'm not saying whether Ladybug was right or wrong to do that, but from Chloe's perspective, she was betrayed by her never giving her a Miraculous again, by forcing her into an early retirement. She really did want to be a hero, but when that was taken away, she had to take up Hawkmoth and his offer. It was her last resort to try and get what she wanted. Now that doesn't make her actions right, but it makes them understandable and kind of sad in a way. So of the villains, I'd have to put her at the bottom of the most evil list. Next up is Lila. Now don't get me wrong, Lila is a bad person, but we don't really know all that much about her. Yes, she's manipulative and possessive and cruel, but in the end, she's just a kid. And we've seen her privately with a similar life to Chloe and Adrian, heavily isolated and seemingly ignored by her parents, in this case her mum. For all we know, they'll unleash a tragic backstory that makes all these behaviours make sense in hindsight, and while she seems to enjoy her threats and manipulation more than Chloe does, I don't think her actions are quite on the same level as the two characters that are higher on the list. Stay tuned for the future though, because she'll probably climb higher as the show progresses and she becomes more and more evil. And this takes us to the penultimate spot on this list, Hawkmoth. You might be surprised that I put Hawkmoth into rank 2. After all, he is the main antagonist of the series, so you might expect him to be the most horrible and evil villain. And yes, in isolation, I'd agree. He's essentially a terrorist who seems to mainly target children. He doesn't care who he hurts in his quest to get the Miraculouses, and on top of that is a borderline abusive parent to his only son. He's deprived him of a normal childhood and even now continues to exert insane levels of control over his life. He actively tries to injure two obviously teenage heroes so he can rob them of their magic jewellery and concocts plans that involve causing as much collateral damage as possible to attract their attention. And on top of that, the majority of his schemes revolve around capitalising on the mental trauma of his son's friends. Like, who does that? And we know for a fact that even if he found out his son was Cat Noir, he wouldn't care. He'd still kick the crap out of him to steal his ring. Father of the year right there. But I can't in good faith put him in the top spot. He clearly has mental issues caused by the loss of his wife, and that's why he's undertaking his supervillain lifestyle. He's desperate to regain what he's lost, and whilst what he's done is pretty deplorable and in my opinion irredeemable, it doesn't mean I can't sympathise with him to an extent. If he hadn't lost his wife, it would be a completely different story with his character, and so there's an element of tragedy that in my opinion keeps him from being as bad as the final villain on the list. And that final villain might be a little unexpected for some of you, but I truly think this character is an awful, awful person. Natalie. Now I know this could be a little bit of a spicy opinion, but she's essentially been part of what is a terrorist organisation designed to destroy people's lives to bring back one woman. And why does she do this? Because she's in love with Hawkmoth. She's complicit in all his plans and evil agendas, and took part in an actual murder. Remember when she made a Ladybug Sentimonster clone, and that clone developed its own free will and desire to be good? And then she executed it? Biggest yikes moment the show has ever had in my opinion. She just slaughtered it. No remorse. She carried on business as usual. She doesn't even have the excuse that she's tormented to insanity by the loss of a loved one, like Hawkmoth does. She's just like this because she lusts after a guy in a butterfly cosplay. And on top of that, she takes part in so many of his schemes that directly affect his son. By this point, surely she cares about Adrian at least a little, but she lets him get hurt over and over and over. She's no gorilla, that's for sure. Gorilla is the best boy. As always though, these are just my own opinions, and I'd like to hear yours. Which of these characters are the worst villains to you? Or maybe there's somebody that isn't on the list that you'd like to add. I'm curious to hear what you have to say, so let me know.